Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 2025 edition of Ipsos Global Trends, the Canadian edition. This year's theme, The Uneasy Decade, captures what we're seeing across societies worldwide, a decade defined by instability, polarization, and rapid change. It's a moment when people are reshaping their expectations of society, technology, and the global economy, and where brands and institutions have decided not just how to keep up, but how to lead. Today, we're going to walk you through both the big picture global trends and also take a deeper dive look into the Canadian data and what it means right here at home. So let's jump in. For those who may be new to Ipsos Global Trends, this is Ipsos' most comprehensive view of what people around the world are thinking, feeling, and doing. Every year we go out to dozens of markets. In this particular case, this year we went out to 43 markets to get a really data-driven, human-centered look at the forces shaping our lives. And it's all powered by our Ipsos Strategy 3 in-house growth consultancy. My name's Diane Ridgway-Crofts, and I lead Ipsos Strategy 3 here in Canada. And today I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues from our Strategy 3 team and our Ipsos team. Let me welcome you, Mike College, Charles Leach, and Rama Zuniga. Thanks to all three of you for joining me today. How are you doing? You ready to get started?
Thanks for having me.
Ready to go. Good.
Okay.
Looking forward to it.
Perfect. All right, let's go. So over the past year, I'm going to start at kind of a macro context and talk about what's been happening. Over the past year, several critical developments have amplified the macro forces that we've been tracking that offer really a clearer picture of how the world will evolve over the next 5 to 10 years. Certainly, the biggest change over the past year has been a rise in economic instability and geopolitical tensions, largely driven by the Trump administration's efforts to reset the global trade agenda. This has fueled nationalism, protectionism, and really zero-sum thinking, rippling into the daily lives that we're all living by raising costs in an already inflationary world, shaping politics and consumer behavior. The second major development has been the sweeping adoption of AI and really tech's double-edged sword. AI has moved from really niche to mainstream, powering everything from how we learn to how we work and how we live. Yet concerns remain over its impact on human skills, data security, and whether safeguards exist to prevent the misuse or loss of control. And lastly, we really see a societal almost reconfiguration happening around the world and here at home. Diversity and sustainability initiatives are being rolled back in many countries as organizations shield themselves from backlash. Meanwhile, we see rising costs of living and demographic shifts sharpening the divides around identity, immigration, and gender, with polarization deepening across the nations. Together, these are truly formative shifts that form the context for the 9 global trends that we'll explore today and how they're manifested here in Canada. So we're going to dig in. Each year we draw on millions of data points from our global study alongside analysis of macro forces, market shifts, and signals to identify our trends and the underlying values. What I love about this year is that we actually decided to hold the 9 trends consistent to last year and focus on really the dramatic shifts unfolding within each one. So I'm going to give you, let's say, a 30,000-foot view on each of the 9 trends. And then we're going to dive deeper into 6 of the trends and look at how they're playing out in Canada and around the world. First, globalization fractures, and Mike's going to talk about this in a minute. This trend is about the collapse of old global rules where tariffs, nationalism, and fractured supply chains force brands to really choose sides. Second, splintered societies, and Charles is going to talk about this, is about nations really turning in on themselves as cultural divides within a country almost become more dramatic than the differences across borders. Climate convergence is all about the world agreeing that we're in crisis, but fighting bitterly over who should pay the price of fixing it and what do we do to get to a better place. Techno Wonder is all about the thrill of technology and what it's doing for us, really kind of colliding with the fear of losing control of Conscientious health is about people really having the tools, the technology, and the appetite to take control of their health destiny. Retreat to old systems, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, is about people abandoning the new for the comfort of the known, even if the old ways really never worked out perfectly. So, really going back to what we know and what we feel safe with. Nouveau nihilism, Charles will pick back up and talk about that. It's about a generation deciding really and understanding that the system is broken for them. So, why would they chase milestones that they'll never reach and how they're coping with that? The power of trust is about trust as almost the rarest currency in a world of misinformation, giving extraordinary power to those who earn it. And finally, Ram is going to talk about the escape to individualism, which is really this trend is about finding freedom from the complexities of today's world by putting yourself first. So we're going to talk about 6 of these trends making the biggest waves today. And I'm going to turn it over to Mike to talk about globalization fractures.
Thanks, Diane. So really, this trend, this globalization fractures, is really about this growing tension between open borders and national control over those same borders. And around the world, and particularly here in Canada, we've seen attitudes toward globalization actually improve over the past decade. But over the last year or so, as you mentioned with the geopolitics and the Trump realignment, things have started to shift of late. The elections in 2024 around the world and in Canada in 2025, U.S. tariffs, geopolitical shifts, really shaping global dynamics. And for many countries, it's no longer this blind optimism in a borderless economy. At home, Canadians have lost a little bit of trust in our longest and largest ally. And the talk of sovereignty and self-reliance, while it echoes some of the global skepticism, there is a contrast with what we see around the world, particularly with the U.S. It's reignited pride in Canada and really in our ability to do things in a uniquely Canadian way. So to go to the next one, despite the some of the trade friction that we've seen, support for globalization has kept rising in Canada. If you go back to 2013, only 47% of Canadians agreed that globalization is good for the country. By 2025, it was 55%, up 8 points. So we have more Canadians now, despite what happened in 2025, saying this is a good thing. This is on, in addition to, or in contrast to the annexing of Canada and some of those discussions that you would think maybe would have softened it. Suggests that Canadians aren't pulling up the drawbridge. We recognize that won't solve our problems, that we want to stay focused on an open, managed wisely border, and that's really core to our prosperity and our identity. Some good news for Canadians is that pride has been on the rise. It was 76% in 2013. If you remember last year when we talked about this, it was down to 58%. And we were talking about fewer people attending Canada Day events. And really, that was the culmination of several years of, I think, political wedge issues, regional disputes, decline in economic sentiment. It really had people questioning whether the country was working for them. But it climbed up considerably, almost 10 points in 2025. And, they say there's nothing like a crisis or a common foe to unite everybody and sort of restore the pride. So we now have 2/3 saying, I feel very proud of the country. What's interesting about Canadian Pride today is it's almost defiant. We used to question our abilities to get things done. Now we think we can take on national projects. We think we can strengthen our borders. We think we can make our own products at home, but we still want to do this in a very Canadian way. Civility, cooperation, compromise, all those things that have defined us in the past, they still hold true. And the other thing that's really key is we don't see our pride coming at the expense of others. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more. But I think it's really key to understand how Canadians feel about their pride. In terms of sort of opening borders right up, should there be limits, should there not? Canadians are split. 41% say we should, 41% say we shouldn't have to have tighter restrictions. You can look on the chart here and you can say, I won't go through all the countries, obviously, but globalization, that appetite for protection is higher across the globe, particularly in emerging countries. Canadians want both. They want to support domestic growth through open trade. We've been this way since we had the free trade debate in the 80s. But at the same time, there are some key sectors we fear about losing control of. And so we're really looking for a balance. I'd say we are global cautious about globalization, but we're not isolated. We don't want to be cut off from the rest of the world. So that's sort of really where we're at. We're not divided as much as we are balanced, I would say. One of the things that's been interesting for us this year is, and we've tracked a lot of this in some other work we've done, is our patriotism really has been put to action. And that has been through the purchase of Canadian products. And a couple of things have happened here. The first one I think is really interesting is the difference in age. And you can see it here. You know, if you're 16 to 24, less than half say, I go to my way to buy Canadian brands. It climbs to almost 80% amongst the older population. And there's a couple of reasons for that. You know, we see this generational split in a lot of our data, but in here particularly, young Canadians grew up in an area of global choice, global media, where a brand's origin, you know, matters less than its ethics, its values, or its vibe, or what it means to them. Younger Canadians are also struggling financially, so they put a higher emphasis on price. And not surprisingly, because of, I mentioned earlier, the issues of does Canada work for me, they're less attached to the country than older Canadians. Older Canadians, on the other hand, they're reliving their history. They're leaning back into homegrown loyalty and, you know, building equity. They want to support local jobs. They want to support local industries. They also can afford to put their money where their mouth is and send a real message, either to Canadian companies that they support them, or to, in this case, some anti-U.S. sentiment. So buying Canadian is still a badge of pride, but it really depends on when you were born. So on this one, on the fractures, there's a couple of market signals that we're looking at. One is on travel, or at least tourist travel, which we see as discretionary. And we really think until we see both Canadians and, to a lesser part, Americans returning to that level of cross-border travel that we had pre-2025, we'll know that that animosity, the worry about reception on both sides is still there. So that's an ongoing one for us to look at, really is looking at behaviors to determine sort of what opinions are. The other one is, that I find interesting and fits with my more public affairs background, is this One Canadian Economy Act, which really puts the pressure on the provinces and paves the way for reduced interprovincial trade, which everybody wants, and also opens the door to some national projects to move forward. So we'll see how long governments in Canada have the same sense of common purpose and national good as Canadians do. This is a really, you know, the leaders responding to what Canadians said, you know, post the annexation conversation. So let's work together to get things done. We're seeing them fall through. And then the final one, and I mentioned the purchasing pride issue before, is really the Buy Canada. You know, much like the retailers responded during the pandemic and helped keep things moving, they responded during the tariff issue. They put T on issues that are tariff. They put Canadian flags on things that were Canadian, really making it easier for Canadians to act on those behaviors. That 2/3 who said, I'm go to my way. Well, it's not hard to go to your way now when you walk into the store and you see everything sort of branded either Canadian or not Canadian. So that we'll see if that continues, whether both retailers keep up the information and whether Canadians keep demanding that information. Going forward, we think the key challenge for marketers, how do you make this wave of pride more than a moment? How do you make it lasting? How do you make it drive meaningful action, not just flag waving? I mean, anybody can wrap themselves in the flag. And I think the key there is, you know, for brands to lean into their Canadian authenticity. Highlight, and this is key, not only your national authenticity, but your local and regional roots. More and more Canadians are like, what's in my backyard as opposed to what's happening on the other side of the country. So the more you can do that, the stronger your ties will be. But also be careful that you don't lean in too far and over-credential yourself from a Canadian standpoint, because Canadians are conscious of maple washing and they'll punish brands who aren't. And finally, recognize, and I mentioned this before, that pride in Canada isn't anti-anything. You know, it's not anti-diversity, it's not anti-any segment, it's not even anti-American. It really is pride in Canada. We want to hold, or we are holding on to the same values we always have: fairness, inclusion, acceptance of others. We're just starting to express those a little more loudly. So I think that's key to remember.
I love that.
Perfect. And then I'll take it over, I think, for the next one. So our next trend is splintered societies. And it's one that actually seems to feel particularly raw right now. Across Canada, we're seeing widening divides, economic gaps, generational rifts, and growing friction around immigration, which was an issue that for decades was actually a point of pride for many Canadians. But the tone has shifted in recent times. Canadians are still valuing diversity and inclusion, but that pride now competes with real anxiety about housing, about affordability, and whether the system still works for everyone. If we ask what really splinters societies, it often starts with economics, with who feels like they're winning and who's being left behind. So we see 3 in 4 Canadians now say that large income and wealth gaps are bad for society, and 7 in 10 believe that the economy is rigged to advantage the rich and powerful. And of course, it's not hard to see why. When rent eats half of your income, when groceries keep rising in cost, when doing everything right still doesn't seem to get you anywhere ahead, then frustration naturally builds. And Canadians aren't just talking about inequality, they're actually living it. And that sense of fairness and the lack of it is really widening the gap between those who feel seen and those who feel that they are not being seen. We're seeing this pattern almost everywhere. So as you can see here, there's a global hardening on views of immigration in many countries. In dozens of markets, the share of people saying that there are too many immigrants in their country has risen sharply over the past year. And Canada's part of that trend. Nearly 2/3 of Canadians, so 63%, now agree that we have too many immigrants. And that's up from 55% last year. What's surprising, though, is that in the US, that number has actually declined. It seems counterintuitive. You would think that that would not be so. In fact, fewer Americans now say that there are too many immigrants in America, even as their political rhetoric around borders grows louder. So while Canada and much of the world are tightening in sentiment, the US is moving at least slightly in the opposite direction. But for Canada, it's a warning sign. The country is long defined by openness, but it's now starting to sound more like the rest of the world, more anxious, more protective, and a little less sure of what openness looks like when our resources seem to be getting scarce. And these divisions, of course, don't stop at national borders. They actually go inside as well. They show up around the dinner table. 4 in 10 Canadians now say there's a growing conflict within their families over values. And that climbs higher among younger Canadians who are navigating a completely different world of identity, information, and politics than their parents did, let alone their grandparents. So what's splintering society isn't just economics or policy, it's perspective. Families may share love and lineage, but they're no longer sharing the same sources of truth. It's polarization at its most personal, and it's happening in living rooms, not just online.
Charles, I love this stat because it says to me, when you look at the generational divide, how you see that we as parents aren't seeing it and our kids are feeling it, right? So they're feeling it. We're not exactly seeing it or recognizing it in a way. So really understanding that gap in generations and how they're feeling is pretty interesting.
Generational gaps are so fascinating, Diane, because you grow up believing they're true, and then often as we get older, you start to question, in fact, whether there really is the gap that you thought existed when you were younger. But here, the numbers don't lie. There clearly is something very different going on generationally, possibly unique, although we haven't done that kind of deep longitudinal analysis. It's fascinating. So even in a time of division and fatigue, we see that Canadians are, of course, still looking for solutions, and that means they're looking for organizations to help find those solutions. Over 80% say businesses have a duty to contribute to society, not just make profits, and 3/4 want brands to make it easier for them to have a positive impact themselves. And that tells us that something important is going on. People still believe that progress is possible. They're looking to businesses, not just to sell, but to help solve, to use their scale, their creativity, and their influence to make everyday life work a little bit better for everyone. So here's some market signals that we're watching. When we talk about splintered societies, we're really seeing the many fault lines running through identity, fairness, and belonging, and how they show up everywhere from politics to business to culture. So first, those divides are increasingly visible in public life. Just last month, the Draw the Line protests united Indigenous, migrant, climate, and justice groups across Canada, all calling out inequality, corporate power, and government inaction. It was a rare moment of solidarity, but also a reminder of how polarized the conversation around fairness and responsibility has become. At the same time, business is stepping in where institutions are falling short. In the US, the challenger bank, Chime, which went public earlier this year, was built to serve people the banking system has long overlooked. Its growth shows that inclusive design and financial accessibility can be powerful differentiators when trust in traditional systems is low or waning. And then finally, we see cultural institutions trying to bring people back together. This year's Scotiabank Hockey Day in Canada streamed games in 6 languages for the first time, from Mandarin to Punjabi to Tagalog to Cree. It's a small but meaningful signal on how inclusion can turn something deeply traditional into a shared experience once again. Taken together, these moments show that fragmentation isn't just a social challenge, it's also shaping how brands, institutions, and communities define belonging in Canada today. What can marketers do? We're often asked how brands should respond to changing sentiment, especially around issues like immigration. When public opinion shifts this quickly, it's tempting to adjust tone or messaging to stay aligned with the current mood of the moment. But our view is that the answer lies inward, not outward. It lies in a company's own values and sense of purpose. So in fractured times, brands need to lead with integrity, even when it might mean challenging prevailing sentiment. Canadians are paying attention to who stands firm in what they believe and who bends to the wind. Because on some issues, it's not about chasing consensus, it's about making sure that you're on the right side of history. So I think we'll pass it over now to Rama, who's going to talk about Techno Wonder.
Great, thanks, Charles. Our next trend, Techno Wonder, captures that same tension between excitement for what technology can do and unease about how fast it's moving. People are fascinated by innovation, but increasingly wary of its impact on their jobs, their mental health, and their privacy. AI has become the perfect symbol of this duality, a source of both hope and hesitation. It's no longer about whether technology can change our lives, but whether it's changing them for the better. There is still a deep belief in progress. 6 in 10 Canadians agree that modern technology is essential to solving the problems of the future. That optimism cuts across generations, especially younger Canadians who've grown up seeing innovation as part of their daily life. At its best, this optimism reflects its confidence in human ingenuity, in our ability to create, to adapt, and to use technology to build a better future. At the same time, worry is rising. 60% of Canadians now say technological progress is destroying our lives, up a staggering 18 points since 2013. That's a huge shift, and it reflects how deeply technology has moved from the background of our lives to the foreground of our well-being. It's shaping our relationships, our attention spans, even our sense of control, and not always in ways that feel good. Canadians admire innovation, but they're starting to question whether progress has outpaced people.
And Rama, I think I'm right. This is the biggest shift we've seen in a decade. Is this conversation around techno worry?
Exactly. So nowhere is that unease clearer than AI. Only 38% of Canadians believe AI is having a positive impact on the world, compared with 58% globally. That places Canada among the most skeptical countries in the world. It's not necessarily that Canadians reject AI, they just haven't seen proof of its benefits in their own lives, and many worry about its implications. One might say we're curious but cautious, wanting reassurance that innovation won't come at the expense of humanity. And this tension can be seen in this chart. Perfect. Across the world, most people still lean more worried than wonderstruck when it comes to technology, and Canada sits firmly on that cautious side. China and Hong Kong are overwhelmingly optimistic about AI, while Canada is among the most skeptical. It's a clear reminder that perspectives on technology are deeply cultural, shaped as much by national temperament and experience as by the technology itself. This skepticism about AI runs across generations. Even among younger Canadians, optimism barely reaches the halfway mark, while older Canadians are considered more doubtful. That tells us this isn't simply a generational divide, it's a national one. Across ages, Canadians are taking a wait-and-see approach, looking for a tangible proof that AI can improve daily life rather than disrupt it. And so see, this is some of our market signals. So when it comes to AI, Canada is a fascinating moment, one defined by both acceleration and anxiety. We're not just adopting new tools, we're trying to build the frameworks to govern them responsibly. So what we're seeing here is reflected in the federal government's AI strategy for the public service launched this year. It's a plan that embeds AI into internal processes, but with clear guidelines for accountability, transparency, and responsible use. In other words, AI by design, not by accident. That focus on control and sovereignty runs deeper. Canadian company Cohere signed a 2025 agreement with the government to deploy its models across public services, a deliberate move to strengthen what's being called sovereign AI. It's about ensuring Canadian innovation doesn't just consume foreign tech, but helps define our own infrastructure and values around it. Next up, we see Toronto's Click Labs, which has developed voice 2 diabetes, an app that can detect type 2 diabetes for a short spoken sentence. It's a remarkable science, a glimpse of how AI could turn everyday devices into diagnostic tools, but it also raises new questions about consent, data, and trust. Together, these signals can capture both sides of techno wonder and techno worry, the thrill of innovation, and the growing realization that now we design, deploy, and govern AI will shape the kind of future we actually want to live in.
I
We're
think
already
this is,
seeing.
sorry, I was just going to say, I think this is one of the most interesting trends for us, Rama, because you look at it and you see how dramatic this has changed over the past year, right? Like it's one of the loudest trends that we have, and you feel this tension between wonder and worry, and you see all the good things that can happen, but you feel every day the worry associated with it, right?
Mhm. It's a bit of an unknown. I mean, we're not entirely sure how this is going to completely unfold, but that's where some of the excitement is. It's kind of opening a new chapter on that.
You can almost hear people's reaction to things like the type 2 diabetes being diagnosed through a short sentence. Your reaction is, oh, wow. And then your second reaction is, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, in one of the world's most tech cautious markets, how can your brand prove technology is worth trusting? Canadians are open to innovation, but they want to see its value clearly, how it makes life simpler, fairer, and more human. That means communicating purpose as much as progress, showing not just what technology does, but why it actually matters. Because in Canada, the winners won't be those who adopt tech the fastest. They'll be the ones who make innovation feel thoughtful, transparent, and genuinely useful.
Amazing.
I'll
So
pass that back
true.
to Diane. There you are.
Thank you so much. So, our next trend, I feel like there's such a through line in this conversation. Our next trend is about retreat to old systems, and it explores how people are looking backward to find comfort and control. Around the world and here in Canada, nostalgia continues to rise. Many long for a time when life felt simpler, even if the past is almost partly imagined or reimagined. It's a way of coping with uncertainty, and we see this as like generationally that nostalgia comes back at key times of stress in culture. It's a way of coping with uncertainty. When the future feels unpredictable, the past feels safe. But the question really is whether nostalgia helps us find stability or if it keeps us from moving forward. And that's where the danger lies. You can see that pull toward the past really clearly in this data. 62% of Canadians say they would like the country to be the way it used to be, up 12 points from 2013. That's a significant rise, and it shows how deeply this sentiment runs. It's not necessarily about rejecting progress per se, but it's about wanting a sense of familiarity and predictability in a world that right now feels kind of anything but. And nostalgia grows stronger with age, but it's hardly limited to older Canadians. Nearly half of Gen Z say that they wish the country were more like it used to be. And that's really kind of remarkable. It means even young people who've never experienced those good old days are nostalgic for a time that they didn't even live through. So this nostalgia is almost an emotion, not a memory. It's a signal of how much people are just craving stability and simpler times. At the same time, this retreat to tradition does have its limits, thank goodness. Only 1 in 4 Canadians agree that the main role of women is to be good mothers and wives, far below the global average of 37%. So while, some values are being romanticized, others are being firmly rejected. It shows that we as Canadians can look back with affection without wanting to actually go back in time. And we see the same thing in this data. towards attitudes towards family. Fewer than 1/3 of Canadians believe that most people ought to have children, well below the global average of 48%. In other words, tradition doesn't need to mean conformity. Canadians may long for a simpler time, but they also believe in the freedom of choice and in defining fulfillment on our own terms. That is such a Canadian point of view. As Canadians look backward to move forward, the challenge becomes for us to know what's worth keeping and what needs to evolve. There's strong support for equality and inclusion. Almost 3/4 of Canadians say transgender people should be able to live their lives as they wish. And 59% of Canadians say that things would be better if more women had positions with responsibilities in government and companies. That's the balance of this moment, is understanding how to hold on to the values that ground us, how to understand how to take this retreat to old systems and this feeling of nostalgia and what we take from it, while still embracing the progress that defines us and will take us into the future. Here's some of the market signals we're watching for retreat to old systems. This is my favorite market system. In uncertain times, we often look backward for reassurance. In May 2025, so earlier this year, King Charles's first Canadian tour as a monarch offered a powerful symbol of stability, reaffirming ties to tradition and constitutional continuity at the very moment when Donald Trump's annexation threats stirred fresh uncertainty. That same retreat to the familiar showed up in consumer culture. Clearly, Canadian relaunched after decades of being away, leaning on retro branding and a Shania Twain partnership to rekindle emotional bonds. And closer to home, Quebec's Vachon revived its classic rosette snack with 90s style packaging and marketing, evoking childhood memories with earlier generations and renewing brand equity. You can see how all of these moments show how in unsettled times we are anchoring ourselves in the systems and symbols of the past while looking toward the future. So for marketers, how do we respond to this moment? The opportunity really lies in creating a fusion of the comfort of the past and also helping to underscore confidence in the future. You can see in everything that the team has presented today how uncertain people are feeling. So how do we bring nostalgia to create comfort? How do we talk about old systems but show them and understand them in a progressive way? How do we make people feel anchored without feeling stuck? Because the most resonant brands are going to be those that help Canadians honor what was good about the past while giving them reasons to believe that the best is still ahead. Which is a great segue back to Charles to talk about nouveau nihilism.
From Vachon rosettes to nihilism. It's like, what a roller coaster we're on today. I love it. I do have a particular interest in nihilism, as I think some of my colleagues know. So nouveau nihilism, like all the rest, of course, is also fascinating. For many Canadians, the traditional milestones that we observe, so these are things like owning a home, starting a family, feeling financially secure, they feel that these things are slipping further out of reach. And so what's emerging today instead is a live for today mindset, which seems to be born from equal parts of rebellion and resignation. The future can feel uncertain, and when that happens, people start investing their energy into the present, into the moment, not because they've given up, but because they're adapting. So it's not nihilism in the old negative sense. And nihilism as a philosophy is very interesting. It goes in two different directions. It can either descend into depression and madness, or it can be a very liberating carpe diem idea. And that's what we're seeing here. It's about finding meaning in the here and now, because tomorrow just simply feels like it's out of control. And so the data behind this is telling. We see that 65% of Canadians agree that the government does not prioritize the concerns of people like them. There's a sense of disconnect there, and that sense of disconnect feeds a broader mood of withdrawal. People don't necessarily want to disengage, they just don't feel like they're being heard. And when faith in institutions starts to fade, many turn inwards, focusing on what they can control and ignoring what they cannot. It's not just political leaders, of course. We see that business leaders don't fare too much better. Only 36% of Canadians say they trust business leaders to tell the truth, and that skepticism seems to be consistent across all generations. It's not just the young kids who are looking upwards to their leaders in dismay. It's part of a broader erosion of authority. Canadians are less likely to take direction from so-called leaders and more likely to look to peers, to influencers, or their own judgment for the guidance that they're seeking. That frustration seems to have shifted into something else entirely, a sort of quiet surrender to the present. Globally, 2/3 of people say they live for today because the future is uncertain. And Canadians, you can see here, sit right in the middle at 67% on that. It's kind of a pragmatic hedonism. They're essentially saying to themselves, if I can't count on tomorrow, I might as well make the most of today, because really today is all I have and all I feel I have some kind of control over. So it's not really apathy, it's more adaptation. You can see that sentiment, especially among younger and lower income Canadians, as you can see in the numbers here. So when the path ahead feels unstable, and the path ahead means things like job security, housing, and affordability, the reward becomes the moment. Canadians are focusing on the small joys they can control, finding meaning and connection in the everyday, rather than waiting for the big milestones ahead of them, which they feel may or may not actually ever come. So some market signals then we're watching for this idea of nouveau nihilism across Canada, since instability seems to be reshaping how people, and this is especially with younger generations, view their futures. First, there's a generation at risk. Reports show that many young Canadians are juggling multiple part-time jobs, they're facing housing precarity, they're struggling with mental health. For them, stability feels increasingly out of reach. The idea of a predictable upward path seems more like nostalgia than reality, and of course, nostalgia that many of them have never actually ever experienced. And at the same time, there's a wave of experience exiting the workforce. We have up to 70% of senior executives planning to retire within the next 5 years. Organizations, therefore, risk losing institutional memory and mentorship. That's all going to go away when that wave retires. So the guardrails of leadership and continuity are eroding just as a more uncertain generation tries to step into that vacuum. And in that context, risk itself becomes a kind of refuge. Younger Canadians seem to be diving into things like sports betting, crypto trading, and other speculative spaces, not necessarily out of optimism, but out of agency. They can do it, they can control it. If the future feels unstable, they're choosing to play the volatility, not avoid it and not ignore it. They're turning risk into recreation and chaos into a coping mechanism. Together, these signals reveal a generation less convinced that security is attainable and more focused on finding meaning and control, or even thrill, in exactly that uncertainty.
I love that signal of risk as recreation. I think all of these are fascinating, but when we do so much work in the financial services space and see what young Canadians are doing and how they're spending money and what they consider an investment or a bet or I can use my knowledge to try to do some things, and the way they're maneuvering is so different from their previous generation.
Yeah, you really see it. Older Canadians, I want to protect what I have and hold on to what I've gained. And younger Canadians going, I don't have that much to lose, so why not take a risk? And as Charles noted, it's moved into their recreational activities and day-to-day lives. It's super interesting.
Exactly. There's almost this collective generational shrug, and they're saying, why not? Right?
Yeah.
Give it a shot.
Yeah.
So as marketers, what do we recommend here? We have a world where tomorrow feels uncertain. So how will your brand make today worth living is the question you should be asking. For Canadians, joy and meaning aren't luxuries, they're lifelines. Brands that can help people experience a little more lightness, a little more comfort, or even connection in the moment, they will be the brands that earn more attention. And in fact, even more than that, they'll earn affection. Because in an uneasy decade, helping people feel good today may be the most powerful promise of all. And with that, I think I will pass it back to Rama, who's going to talk about escape to individualism.
Yeah, thank you. So if nouveau nihilism was about withdrawal, stepping back from a world that feels overwhelming, escape to individualism is more about re-engagement, but on our own terms. When people can't change the system, they turn inward, focusing on the one thing they can control, themselves. Individualism has been a defining feature of modern life for years, but this year it stands out as the most powerful value in our study. Canadians are choosing autonomy over conformity, curiosity over consensus, and simplicity over complexity. It's a quiet form of rebellion, not giving up, but opting out of the noise to define life, success, and happiness on their own terms. And that desire for control and calm shows up clearly in the data, a collective wish to slow things down. So after years of crisis and acceleration, Canadians are hitting pause. Nearly 8 in 10 say the world today is changing too fast, and 6 in 10 feel overwhelmed by too many choices. It's a telling shift, the exhaustion of a population that spent the past few years running to keep up. In a way, that's the antidote to nihilism. Instead of checking out, people are setting boundaries, choosing simplicity, slowing down, and protecting their energy. They're not rejecting progress, they're just rejecting the chaos. So we'll see here on the next slide. Yes, among those aged 16 to 24, 3/4 wish they could slow down the pace of their lives, far higher than any other generation. That's remarkable for a group that's grown up in the fast lane, always connected, always on. It shows that even digital natives are seeking space, not escape from the world, but from its constant demands. Where nouveau nihilism reflects surrender, escape to individualism reflects self-preservation. It's about taking time back, attention, and agency, redefining what control looks like when the outside world feels unmanageable. You can see this mindset is just how Canadians are redefining success. Fewer than half, just 43%, say that fulfillment in life means achieving a prominent position in their career. That is far below the global average of 54%. For many Canadians, status has lost its shine. After many years of burnout, they're more interested in stability, balance, and meaning than titles or hierarchies. In contrast to the effort attitudes of nouveau nihilism, this isn't just giving up on ambition, it's reshaping what ambition actually looks like. And the data makes that clear, where fulfillment isn't about climbing higher, it's about feeling whole. 84% Canadians say having a good work-life balance is more important than having a successful career. That's not a quiet preference, that's a cultural reset. Even younger Canadians, long stereotyped as hustlers or job hoppers, are saying no to the old playbook. They're redefining success not as achievement at all costs, but as alignment, where work fits into life, not the other way around. This is individualism as equilibrium, a rebalancing of priorities, not a rejection of effort. And beyond that work, that sense of autonomy extends to how Canadians think about their values and who gets to define them. And beyond work, that sense of autonomy extends to how Canadians think about their values and who gets to define them. This slide really sums up the heart of escape to individualism, where 78% Canadians agree that it's up to everyone to work out their own set of principles to guide their decisions. That's an overwhelming affirmation of personal agency. Canadians are no longer looking to institutions or authority for moral guidance. They're writing their own rule books. It's a natural next step for our years of instability. When the world feels unpredictable, self-definition becomes an act of control. And that pursuit of individuality isn't just philosophical, it's transforming what people expect from brands and culture too. So let's see here from the signals. As traditional paths and shared milestones lose their pull, more Canadians are choosing to chart their own course. We see it first in the rise of the solo economy. Living, working, and traveling alone have become mainstream, One-person households are at record highs, and solo travel is booming. Independence has shifted from necessity to aspiration. Technology is amplifying that individualism. In the next signal. So AI-driven platforms now anticipate not just what we buy, but who we are. Curating experiences so personalized, they blur the line between algorithmic prediction and identity itself. In our last signal, we see cultural self-expression taking center stage. RW & Co.'s latest campaign invited Canadian musicians to reinterpret its fall collection through their own creative lens, turning fashion into a mirror of individuality in an increasingly uniform world. Together, all these three signals show how individuality has become both refuge and rebellion, a way to reclaim meaning in an age of sameness. So the question becomes, as marketers, how can you turn individuality from an aspiration into an everyday experience? Canadians want to feel seen for who they are, not as segments or targets, but as people with distinct identities, needs, and choices. That means creating flexibility, personalization, and authentic self-expression in ways that feel real, not performative. The challenge and the opportunity for brands is to empower individuality without fragmenting connection, because the most resonant brands will be those that make people feel both unique and understood.
I love that. I love that. Across all 9 trends, we see a common thread. We really are seeing a world searching for balance between globalization and self-reliance, between innovation and the unease we feel, between progress and nostalgia. We're trying to find stability in that in-between. It's an uneasy decade, to be sure, but it's also one full of possibility. And we really have to understand that and underscore that, because when people feel uncertain, they don't stop caring about what's going to happen. They start redefining what matters. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. If you'd like to explore these ideas further, we can help you activate them inside your organization. That could mean strategy workshops, it could mean keynote sessions, it could be bespoke reports that bring the trends to life in the context of your business. Or if you want to dig into the data signals directly, our signals dashboards and trend portals are always available for deeper exploration. Because our goal isn't just to really explain and share what's changing, but it's to help you turn this foresight and understanding into action. Again, thanks so much. Thank you to you, Mike, Rama, Charles, for joining me today. What a pleasure to spend some time with you. Thank you for spending the time with us, everyone who's joined us. We hope that this look at the uneasy decade has given you new perspective and a new energy and a new understanding of maybe this, how we're feeling, but also what we can do to help Canadians move forward in a positive way and really understand what lies ahead. So thanks so much and have a great day.